Number 9. Endurance Shipwreck. Sir Ernest Shackleton was an early 20th century explorer who apparently couldn't get enough of Antarctica. He led 3 expeditions there between 1901 and 1917. He and his crew embarked on his final Antarctic journey in 1914 aboard a 3-masted wooden ship called the Endurance. They ran into multiple problems almost immediately after leaving South Georgia Island for the Weddell Sea. The voyage was slowed down by ice, and things only worsened from there until the ship became completely trapped in an ice floe. Shackleton hoped that the vessel would eventually free itself, but he eventually realized that the pressure from the pack ice was crushing the Endurance. He ordered his crew to abandon ship, and it went down shortly thereafter. The wreckage was recently discovered on the sea floor, 4 miles from where it sank. For the past 106 years, it has sat 10,000 feet below the waves. Locating the vessel was no easy task. It took a team of experts more than 2 weeks to find it using underwater drones while combating bitter cold temperatures in some of the world's iciest waters. The ship is damaged, as the team expected, but it's in remarkable condition for its age thanks to the frigid sea, which lacks the wood-eating creatures that have destroyed wrecks elsewhere. The $10 million search and discovery were made possible thanks to an anonymous donor. Under the Antarctic Treaty, the wreckage is a protected historical monument and will therefore remain in its current resting place. Number 8. Prehistoric Polar Bear. Until somewhat recently, scientists were more or less clueless about the origins of polar bears, including when and where they first emerged and why they developed a preference for the Arctic climate. To give you an idea of how little they knew, the estimates for when the species evolved into existence range from 50,000 to more than 1 million years ago. That all changed in 2004, when a geologist unearthed the most ancient fossilized polar bear remains ever found in the form of a jawbone. He discovered the specimen while digging in the frozen tundra in Norway's Svalbard archipelago as part of a sediment research project. A DNA analysis revealed that the bear was an adult male who lived and died around 120,000 years ago. Biologist and polar bear expert Ian Sterling told Science.org that the fossil gave experts a rare glimpse into the process of one species evolving into another. The bear's DNA bore hallmarks of modern polar bears and brown bears, indicating that it was one of the first to branch off from the brown bear lineage. There are other clues that are helping to build a more complete picture of how polar bears came to exist. For example, there's a population of brown bears known as the ABC bears. They live exclusively on the Alaskan islands of Admiralty, Banneroff, and Chichagof, and they're most closely related to polar bears than other brown bears. The evidence suggests that the ancient polar bear lived at a time where the species was just starting to spread throughout the Arctic. This happened between the last 2 ice ages, when the Earth's climate was warmer than it is now. Since then, over 1,000 generations of polar bears have existed, during which time the species genetically adapted to the frigid Arctic environment that it's so well cut out for. Number 7. 24,000-year-old living organisms. In recent years, scientists have identified numerous life forms that managed to survive for tens of thousands of years in a deep freeze. One of the latest discoveries came last year, when a team of researchers discovered microscopic freshwater multicellular organisms in 24,000-year-old Siberian permafrost, known as rotifers. These creatures are found in freshwater habitats worldwide. They join a growing list of organisms that have been revived after being removed from their frozen surroundings. In 2018, the same team that recently discovered the rotifers found 40,000-year-old viable roundworms in the permafrost. Scientists have also brought ancient moss, seeds, viruses, and bacteria back to life. As fascinating as this is, it raises serious concerns about the possibility of harmful pathogens being released into the environment as glaciers and permafrost melt. In fact, experts believe that has already happened. In 2016, there was a mysterious anthrax outbreak on Siberia's Yamal Peninsula. Over 2,000 reindeer were infected and dozens of residents were hospitalized. Researchers traced the outbreak to the rotting carcass of an infected reindeer that died 80 years earlier. The animal's remains had recently been exposed during an unusual intense heat wave, which caused more of the permafrost to melt than usual. As climate change accelerates melting, viruses and bacteria will continue to become active after lengthy dormant periods. And there's unfortunately a good chance that there will be more outbreaks of anthrax and other diseases. Number 6. A new Arctic island. During a research expedition in the Arctic last year, A group of scientists arrived at what they initially believed was Udok, an island that was discovered not that long ago in 1978. But they soon realized that they were further north than they originally thought, and that they had discovered a new island that nobody knew about. Expedition leader Morten Roche said that when he posted photos of the island's coordinates on social media, many self-proclaimed island hunters were in disbelief. Until now, Udok was officially considered the world's northernmost island. The newly discovered island sits about 2,600 feet north of Udok. It was revealed by shifting pack ice that had previously concealed it. Ice or no ice, it's easy to understand why nobody even noticed this tiny piece of land, which measures just 100 by 200 feet. It consists mainly of small mounds of silt and gravel, and appears to be largely devoid of life. Researchers don't expect it to exist for very long. Just one bad storm could potentially wipe it off the map, according to Roche. The team doesn't think that climate change is responsible for revealing the island, which comes as good news in a world where the effects of global warming are becoming more and more noticeable. They propose naming it Kuka Lake, which is Greenlandic, for the northernmost island. Do you think there's more islands that haven't been discovered yet? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 5. Kuka Shipwreck. Built in 1889, the Kuka was a 172-foot-long wooden tow barge that spent most of its time carrying lumber across the Great Lakes. During the Prohibition era, it became a party boat headquartered in northern Michigan's Lake Charlevoix. According to local legend, Al Capone frequented these gatherings, as he may have even owned the boat. By then, the aging vessel was falling into despair and needed to be pumped out daily. But this didn't stop partygoers from cruising along the lake, which afforded the kind of privacy that they needed to avoid getting caught drinking by the police. It wasn't all fun and games though, and residents grew tired of the violence and debauchery that went on board the Kuka. The final straw came in 1931 when a manager tried to break up a fight and was shot. What happened after that isn't exactly clear. According to Up North Live, a local church bought the floating vice den. It sank the following year under suspicious conditions. Some speculate the church members sabotaged the Kuka, perhaps to make sure it could never be used for parties again, or to avoid a tax liability. Even though the boat was old and in rough shape, there were no outward signs that it was going to sink. But it is possible that it simply wasn't seaworthy. Divers Chris Roxburgh and Dusty Cliffman recently cut through a thick layer of ice to explore the wreck, which sits 50 feet below the surface. They found it in surprisingly good condition, owing to the lake's relatively calm waters. But the investigation didn't bring the pair any closer to knowing exactly what sent the Kuka to its watery grave. Number 4. High-altitude Viking sword. In 2017, reindeer hunters spotted a seemingly man-made artifact resting between two boulders in Norway's Upland region, roughly 5,380 feet above sea level. It was an 1,100-year-old Viking sword, and this was the highest elevation that an object of this type has ever been found. The weapons finders alerted archaeologists, who investigated the site in hopes of finding more artifacts and perhaps even a Viking burial. But they came up empty-handed, which begged the obvious question of how the sword alone ended up there. It's possible that an ancient hunter dropped it while walking through the woods, and the person may have even died nearby, even though their remains haven't been found. For now, experts can only speculate about the sword's origin. Tests revealed traces of lichen, indicating that there were periods where it was exposed to the environment, despite having spent a considerable amount of time buried in snow and ice. But based on the amount of time it spent out there in the open during the region's short summers of a 1,000-year period, the sword should have held more lichen on it when it was found, and it also should have been rustier than it was. The weapon is in excellent condition. In fact, it would still be functional today if it were fitted with a new handle. According to scientists at the University of Ulso, they believe that its remarkably intact state may result from being in a somewhat dry location, as well as the lack of corrosive salt in the high-altitude environment. Number 3. A new Antarctic island. The Antarctic Peninsula's two major glaciers are retreating at an unprecedented speed. As the ice melts, previously hidden parts of our planet that no modern human have ever seen are being revealed. 2 years ago, scientists with the International Thwaites Glacier Offshore Research Project discovered an uncharted island that was visible above sea level for the first time in human history. They spotted the 1,150-foot landmass while sailing near the Pine Island Glacier. The team visited the island specifically to examine the layer of brown rock that helped them identify it as actual land in the first place. They determined that it was made from volcanic granite. It's the only rocky outcropping of its kind for at least 40 miles in any direction. according to expedition member James Marshallek. The team named the landmass Sif Island, after the Norse goddess representing the Earth. Most of the island is completely covered in ice. Based on satellite images, researchers believe that it was once part of the dwindling Pine Island Glacier ice shelf. A time-lapse analysis shows that the ice shelf began to steadily retreat from the island in 2011. The island may have appeared during a process called rebounding, when melting glacial ice relieves underlying pressure, causing land to rise above sea level. Number 2. Prehistoric Lake. There's been times throughout the world's history, namely during periods of global warming hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago, when Greenland was ice-free. At one point, a 2,700 square mile lake formed. It was roughly the size of Rhode Island and Delaware combined and was over 800 feet deep at its deepest point. At least 18 streams fed into the lake from the north, and it drained through an outlet to the south. Over the last million years or so, the ice that covered most of Greenland has advanced and retreated. Today, the lake sits over a mile below the existing ice sheet. All that's left is its sediment, and scientists don't know when it last held water. They discovered the Paleo Lake Basin using surface-penetrating radar, which enables researchers to identify objects and sites that are hidden or difficult to spot. So far, experts only know rudimentary details about the lake, and they don't fully know how it was formed. Theory suggests that a glacier carved the body of water out of the landscape, or that perhaps a depression formed when an ancient, now deformed fault line pulled part of the Earth's crust apart. Until or unless the ice covering the lake melts, the only way to determine its age, or learn anything else about it, is to drill into it. Researchers believe that the buried sediment may contain telling evidence of the site's climatic history, as well as any life that existed there in the past. This information can prove especially valuable for guiding Greenland's response to climate change. Numerous subglacial lakes have been discovered in Greenland and Antarctica in recent years, but this is the first example of a fossil lake bed beneath the ice. Over the next several years, scientists plan to drill into northwestern Greenland's bedrock in hopes of learning more about its geological and environmental past. And number 1. Subglacial Lakes. There's a vast network of subglacial lakes hidden beneath the Antarctic ice, buried anywhere from 1.2 to 2.5 miles below the surface. These little-studied bodies of water experience a strange filling and draining cycle that scientists don't fully understand, and they believe that this actively may affect the movement of ice sheets, including how fast they travel, as well as how and where meltwater reaches the ocean. This, in turn, can influence the Southern Ocean's currents, which could possibly have a global impact on ocean circulation. In other words, while it's easy to feel unaffected by something that goes on so far away, the effects are far-reaching and perhaps worldwide. Last July, scientists announced the discovery of 2 new lakes, dubbed the Lower Conway Subglacial Lake and the Lower Mercer Subglacial Lake. They sit on the continent's rocky surface, where the glacier meets the land. They were identified as part of a study, which also found that many of Antarctica's subglacial lakes have drained and refilled numerous times over the last 17 years. Researchers determined that there are connections between these bizarre cycles of ice sheet movement, but they're still trying to figure out the exact nature of these relationships. Learning more about these cycles will lead to a better understanding of a climate change and the things that can be done to slow it down. Thanks for watching. Have you ever discovered something frozen in ice? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.